welcome Dr. Gerald Horne. He is a prolific author of more than 45 books and historian in the radical tradition who holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of African American Studies at the University of Houston. He can be heard across the Pacifica Network and on social media. And of course, he's usually on with Esther on Fridays at 10 a.m. We'd also like to give a big round of applause for Dr. Greg Carr, who's also no stranger. Dr. Greg Kamathi Carr is a professor of Africana Studies and Law at Howard University, but he can also be heard on many, many platforms. And one of the easiest ways you might be able to catch him is on YouTube. You can just go to In Class with Carr, and he is on weekly with a wonderful several-hour discussion. He is now also on Sirius XM Urban View, I believe Wednesday through Friday, and much, much more. So we are very happy to have both Dr. Carr and Dr. Horne with us today. This is our Pledge Drive show. This is our last Monday show for the Pledge Drive. We have a goal of $800 to make, and last week we were about $75 short, so we want to up that goal today for $900. You can make a pledge. You can go right now to the website, WPFWFM.org. Just click that big red button and scroll and make a pledge. Your pledge can be sustaining. If you don't have a whole bunch of money today, pledge $12 a month and help us make that goal. You can also pledge by using the old-fashioned telephone, 202-588-9739, 202-9739. And let's jump right into our show for today. Again, everybody better wake up, including those of us who are going to the polls or have gone to the polls. We do have choices in this very difficult situation. And I'd like to first welcome, let's start with Greg Carr, and we're going to jump right in as well to Dr. Horne. Good morning, Dr. Carr.
Everybody make your pledge, because it's election day in the United States. November the 5th is just the last election day, but it's election day, and it is moving day at WPFW. If you can hear us today, and thank you, Joni, I moved a lot of work into the cyberspace and the community, trying to jailbreak the Black University, but I promise you, I thought there were 24 hours in the day. Clearly, your life and Chuck and everybody there at WPFW shows you there are more than 24 hours in the day. But I never, in my wildest dream, thought that Dr. Gerald Horne, in addition to being the most important scholar we have in terms of his books and his political work and everything else, that he would add ubiquitous social media and cyberspace presence. He is the hardest working man in
Yes.
So it's good to be with everybody this morning. I cannot wait for this conversation. Good to hear your voice.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Carr. Welcome, Dr. Gerald Horne. And again, we are very honored and happy to have you on with us, sharing your wisdom. And our focus today, and perhaps you want to just jump in with your initial thought. We know that these choices are not, we have at the polls are not, they're far from perfect, but we want to reflect on some of the lessons from the past when it comes to fighting fascism, addressing fascism, and also the lessons in general when it comes to addressing a very, very frightening situation that we face. So what are your opening comments for today, Dr. Horne?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Second of all, I think that we should take seriously the comment of Mark Milley, the former top military man under Mr. Trump, who told Bob Woodward, the Washington Post columnist, that Mr. Trump was, quote, fascist to the core. We should take seriously the comments of John Kelly, the former Marine general, a longtime chief of staff under Mr. Trump, who also spoke about Mr. Trump's fascist pretensions. But at the same time, I don't think that we should echo many of our liberal friends who seem to suggest that fascism can be reduced only to the person of one Donald J. Trump. I think we need to realize that in a country which has been based upon liquidation of the indigenous and mass enslavement of the Africans, that the womb has always been fertile for the rise of fascism. You know that a few years ago, I wrote a book that had as a subtitle, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. And looking at the history of Texas, which I indicated is a kind of microcosm of the United States writ large, one of the points I tried to make was that with regard to the indigenous question, the struggle to uproot the Comanches in Texas in the first place, that the European settlers were bent upon liquidating the Comanches, whereas a number of the elites simply wanted to put them on reservations, which was the ultimate accomplishment or attainment, if you like. And so we need to recognize that fascism in the United States has a mass base. And in terms of the lessons of history, one of the lessons is that if you look at what's happening today, particularly that really alarming rally at Madison Square Garden yesterday, with insults tossed casually, Puerto Ricans, at Black people, at Jewish people, at women of various stripes, that this was hardly an accident. What I mean is that over the past 75 years, there has been a concerted effort to destabilize and bludgeon left-wing alternatives to the status quo. Those attempts to destabilize and bludgeon left-wing alternatives oftentimes were joined in by liberal forces such as the NAACP, which purged their leader, W.E.B. Du Bois, in 1948 because of his association with a third-party challenge of former FDR Vice President Henry A. Wallace, and of course the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, also did not stand tall. So it's not surprising that when you rule out left-wing alternatives to an inadequate status quo, that you plant the seeds for the rise of a right-wing alternative, which is what we're facing today. And until we grasp that nettle, I'm afraid to say that we'll be perpetually in trouble.
Yes, I hear you, Dr. Horne, and I want to just mention that some of us can take lessons from our ancestors. I know my parents, as a child, that's all I heard them talking about is how we address fascism. And I often heard about, Dr. Horne or Dr. Carr probably remembers the date when there was another horrific presentation in New York's Madison Square Garden promoting fascism. And so what are the lessons from our ancestors? And I'm starting to think of it more like a chess game. Our choices may not and obviously are not perfect, but some of us believe that one choice will give us a better option to continuing to struggle against fascism. And I want to mention, Dr. Horne, you were lifted up Saturday night. There was a Paul Robeson Awards, Justice and Peace Awards Gala, and Graylin Hagler was one of the awardees and mentioned you and, of course, your book about Paul Robeson. And Reverend Hagler talked about the need to really make this understand that we do have a choice. He talked about the Abraham Lincoln Brigades back when I was growing up. I heard about it quite a bit. We don't hear about them enough, but people who actually from this country who actually risked their lives to fight against fascism throughout the world. So I think we have lessons from the past, as Gerald just said. How do we address fascism, and what is our best move in the coming 8 days? And Dr. Carr, I know you have a lot to say about this as well.
I'm glad you raised the comparison, Joni. There's an article actually on the Washington Post website this morning, Another Night at the Garden, how Trump's rally echoed one in 1939. And of course, at least that particular rally you're talking about at Madison Square Garden that was sponsored by the German Bund Society was openly pro-Hitler. As the article notes, it was detailed in a 2013 book, Swastika Nation, by Arnie Bernstein. And it was these American patriots. It was actually held to commemorate George Washington's 207th birthday. It was February 20th, 1939. And the writer in today's Washington Post, and parenthetically, shout out to Jeff Bezos, who is showing again, for folks who weren't paying attention before now, his true colors, along with the owner of the Los Angeles Times, for making both the Times and the Post more relevant to many people who don't read newspapers by converting what would have been a kind of pro forma endorsement of one candidate to an endorsement of no candidates, and thereby highlighting that for the capitalist class, they don't care who wins the election, who's best for their bottom line. But the writer this morning notes that there are key differences. Philip Monk wrote this article between the 39 rally and what, as Dr. Horne reminds us, took place last night, was a horrific rally. And one of the differences is that the rally in 1939 was centered on German immigrants to the United States, and it was sponsored by an outside source. Here, this was supported last night by one of the two major party candidates for the United States presidency. And, there's been a lot of talk of fascism. As Gerald said, we heard what Donald Trump's former chief of staff said. And, when we think about fascism, not only in the context of Italy and Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and Mussolini and Hitler and the Fascisti and the Fasci party, but, the idea of any form of behavior that's not only autocratic, intolerant, or oppressive, any type of behavior that seeks to enforce your worldview on other people, but the fact that the democratic apparatus, the whole apparatus of participatory democracy is being used, that is a terrible form of fascism. We're not talking yet, although in Project 2025, you can imagine, and Kevin Roberts, the architect, the leader of Project 2025, who we'll get into in a moment, who has his PhD from the University of Texas, as Gerald and I talked about before, last week on Sirius, wrote his dissertation at the University of Texas. This is Kevin Roberts, Slaves and Slavery in Louisiana, the Evolution of the Atlantic World Identities. He begins his dissertation with the Haitian Revolution of 1791, that Gerald has written extensively about, and also ends it in 1831 with the Nat Turner Rebellion. So Kevin Roberts knows exactly what he's doing. He isn't unaware of the history of African people in this country, but when we read Project 2025, and he has said publicly, well, this will be a bloodless revolution if the left allows it. When you read Project 2025, they are fully prepared to unleash that. Oh, thank you. They're more than willing to unleash the federal apparatus on us if we try to resist. But that really is how fascism works, from creeping to surging in a democracy, or a so-called democracy. Hitler never had all of the German people. In fact, if you think about it, and scholars have written and talked about this, a third of 51%, or a third of 50% plus one, or a third of the majority in the Electoral College is all they need. Now having captured the Republican Party, and as Gerald said, this is a project that you can trace back for several generations. Certainly, the Powell Amendment of 1970, well, not Powell Amendment, this Powell Memorandum of 1971, where Lewis Powell, writing for his friend who was running the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, says, we got to create a think tank. We've got to create some mechanisms to basically take back America, and for free enterprise and white supremacy and Christianity, as they would look at it, Christian fascism, really. 2 years later, as Gil Scott Heron records Winter in America in 1973, critiquing what's going on in the country, the Heritage Foundation is founded, in some ways a response to what Powell's call for what needed to happen on the right. And then, of course, they published their first document that we now call Project 2025, but they have called for every election cycle since 1981, the mandate for leadership. And somebody read it to Ronald Reagan. I doubt he read it himself. And he then had his staff read it. And they brag in Project 2021, Dr. Roberts, that 60% of what was in that original project, I guess 1981, was implemented in the federal government. Remember deregulation, remembering firing the air traffic controllers, those kind of things. What we are talking about finally, and as I said, I'm glad you brought up the 1939 rally, is not a group of people, whether it be Billy Sunday, whether it be Charles Lindbergh in the 1930s supporting fascism and hoping that they could capture the federal apparatus. Remember Philip Roth's novel turned into a miniseries on HBO, The Plot Against America. No, we're talking about them having captured one of the major parties on the verge of an electoral victory, with the Manchurian Candidate, not in a movie by Frank Sinatra or Denzel Washington, but in the first person of J.D. Vance, wholly owned by billionaires, sitting poised, whether it be Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, to take over the presidency from the signing pen, Donald Trump. Never forget, they may evoke the 25th Amendment. But ultimately, what we have seen is this isn't 1939. It could be much, much worse.
Absolutely. And Dr. Horne, we have a few more minutes before we go to our first pitch break, but perhaps share with us a little more about who is behind some of the forces behind this project 2025.
Well, I would point your audience to the article in the New York Times Magazine just yesterday on the so-called MAGA moguls, some of whom you will be familiar with, such as Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, referenced by Dr. Carr. Others you may not be familiar with, such as David Sachs, another titan of Silicon Valley. And then, of course, a man who was not mentioned, who's probably the giant of them all, of Silicon Valley, the leader of venture capital in that part of Northern California. I'm speaking of Roloff Botha. That last name might ring a bell because, of course, he is the grandson of a chief architect of apartheid. Speaking of the late foreign minister of apartheid South Africa, Roloff Botha, and of course the aforementioned Musk, Thiel, and Sachs all grew up in apartheid Southern Africa. And it's part of the nonfeasance of our movement that, and also the nonfeasance of the New York Times article, which did not even mention this relevant and salient fact, that this encroachment into the highest levels of the U.S. ruling class by sons of apartheid has barely attracted attention. And you would think that it would be highly relevant, particularly to those who supposedly are concerned about the rise of fascism, when you have in North America, as we speak, those seeking to implement their odious plans here that led to many of their fathers and forefathers being kicked out of Southern Africa. And once again, pardon me, but I would like to point to the omissions of many of our friends. I mean, for example, if you take one of the key developments of the past half century, the rise of China, which was accompanied by the deindustrialization of the United States with entire plants floating across the Pacific, that took place in a bipartisan manner. Interestingly enough, one of the chief architects of this plan was Leonard Woodcock, a former leader of the United Auto Workers who became U.S. ambassador to China at the time of deindustrialization. Deindustrialization, of course, has whacked the U.S. working class, and at the same time, with the rise of China, has injected anti-Asian hysteria into the bloodstream of U.S. political society. But once again, many of our liberal friends, even many of our friends who consider themselves to be radical, didn't have a mumbling word to say as this gargantuan change was taking place. And so, once again, as we seek to confront today's fascism, it might be healthy to engage in a scintilla of self-criticism.
And reflection as well. Yes. As we know, right now is the time for our fall pledge drive, and we have a goal of $800, or I'm going to say $900. I don't know if we've had any pledges yet, but now is the time. There could not be a more critical time for WPFW to be strong as we head into these unknown waters. We need you to make a pledge. 1-800-222-9739, or you can also go to the website, WPFWFM.org, and we really need your pledges. We are not brought to you by the war industry, making those bombs and making sure that genocide continues. We're not brought to you by the pharmaceutical company, making sure that you do not know some of the healthy ways to heal yourself. Pharmaceutical company pours billions of dollars into their advertisements and definitely helps to control some of those votes on Congress, as does the war industry. We're not brought to you by those people. We're not brought to you by the unhealthy food industry that makes sure you eat things with lots of sugar and lots of salt, et cetera, et cetera. We are brought to you by the people, and that means you. So let me know, Mikey, if there have been any pledges. And
you've got Katia too.
Oh, great. Okay, I was waiting for you, Katia. Welcome. I didn't see you. So what would you have to say, Katia?
Well, first of all, I want to say good morning to your esteemed guests, Dr. Carr and Dr. Horne. It's so nice to be with both of you today and to hear you. And this is exactly why you should support Joni's program, the caliber of thinkers that we have, the caliber of intellect that we have here, of analysis that we have here this morning. Joni's show is no stranger to what we have here this morning. And so we ask you now to go to the phone, make that call that makes the difference. $800 to go, folks. Joni produces a fine hour every week, and it is always for the people. And as you've heard all morning, these are the discussions, the conversations, I dare say, although both of our guests are quite esteemed and have been on corporate media, I would dare say that they appeared first on Pacifica, on WPFW. And we are happy that they return to us again and again. And even the type of conversation, though, that they can have here is much different than the conversations they have on corporate media. So if you appreciate a space where free speech is truly free speech, where even unpopular facts or things that people rather us be silent on or lifted up onto Heal DC, then please go to the phone and make that call, or go to the website and make that click that makes the difference. $800 to go, 800-222-9739 or WPFWFM.org. You can also go online to WPFWFM.org. I get ahead of myself. And you can use Cash App at $WPFWFM. Support that which supports you in the form of To Heal DC, produced and hosted by Joni Eisenberg and Chuck Hicks.
And I'll say that our ancestors are right here with us, helping to create these shows. Again, we really need you to go to the phones and make sure that WPFW remains strong as we move into this future. Again, our two esteemed guests this morning is Dr. Greg Carr and Dr. Gerald Horne, sharing a lot of wisdom as we walk into these, what is still really unknown what's going to happen after 8 days, 10 days, as we find out how the votes are going to go. And I'd like to ask both Dr. Horne and Greg Carr to comment. I'm going to start with, well, either of you. As Gerald refers to people sometimes as our friends on the left. Our friends on the left sometimes and often on this radio station feel there is no difference between these choices. And of course, we know that there really isn't a difference between, well, there is a difference between the choice of genocide in one country and fascism perhaps in the world. And as difficult as the choices seem to us, many of us believe that there is a difference in the choices. Perhaps we could think of it like a chess game, and which choice might put us in a better position to continue to struggle and to make some progress than the other choice. So, Greg Carr, what would you have to say about that?
Oh, well, I want to echo just for a second here everything that you said and Katia said about the value and importance of WPFW. Project 2025, the 30 chapters in the document Mandate for Leadership, divided into 5 sections, the longest of which is the section that is entitled the General Welfare, Section 3, is is nothing short of a vision for a Christian fascist theocracy. And I want to say something in particular as relates to WPFW in that vein. In the chapter on the Federal Communications Commission by Brendan Carr, that's chapter 28, there is talk of reining in the FCC. There's talk of, they go after the low-hanging fruit in their minds because the word woke is strewn throughout this 922-page document, but addressing TikTok's threat to U.S. national security. We can talk about more details in a different vein later on, but I want to say this specifically in regard to those who are thinking about who need to be contributing to the survival of WPFW and the thriving of WPFW. The whole vision of fascism, as it is articulated on the right here, involves also suppressing dissent. And that also means suppressing ideas. And the suppression of ideas, and in the section on foreign policy, they talk about everything from what we know as the Voice of America to any external projecting soft power in the United States, trying to shape actually the thinking and the ideas of folks who live around the world. But here domestically, they would love nothing more than WPFW not exist. There's a chapter here on the Public Broadcasting Corporation, of course. I want to say that finally in the context of people pledging for WPFW, to say that the creation through technology of an apparatus by which anybody can talk to everybody at any given time. Why Elon Musk, for example, bought Twitter. Why, for example, the Activist News Network has now become a bit of a clearinghouse for the voice of Gerald Horne across the various platforms, including one in the sister station in Pacifica out in California. And we can listen to his insights everywhere. They don't want that kind of thing. And, they're talking about the enemy within. You hear Donald Trump talking about the enemy within. We have to understand that the very people who are saying both parties are the same, the very people who are platforming important voices, whether it be Claudia de la Cruz, whether it be Cornel West and Melina Abdullah, whether it be Jill Stein, whoever you want to say, those very people who would then say that both parties are the same and that we need to sit this one out, or in the case of Dr. Stein and those aligned with her, perhaps a Trump victory would be better because it would heighten the contradictions, however they're stuck in this whole feedback loop ideologically. Well, those very same people would then not be able to talk to anybody but themselves and wait for the police to knock at their door if this wing of the broad, as Gerald says, fascist kind of oriented United States structure prevails, at which point now, perhaps you get the acceleration of the thing you say is necessary before revolution comes. But I'm always suspicious of people talking about revolution. In the words of Haile Gerima, the best you can do is probably organize and help effect change. Revolution, sometimes circumstances beyond the control of any one or group of us are what trigger revolution. But I'm really interested in hearing what Dr. Horne has to say about this, because I suspect, having seen many of these iterations before directly, in addition to his research, he's got some insights we especially need to hear this morning, when there are people who are saying both parties are the same.
Absolutely. And it seems like a strange choice. We know that this genocide is going on. It's horrific. Most of us listening to this station does not want that to continue. But what will put us in a better position to organize, to continue to organize and strategize and move forward? Gerald Horne, your comments.
Dr. Horne there?
Is Dr. Horne there?
He's there.
You're muted, Dr.
Sorry,
Horne.
I muted myself so that I didn't bring in any ambient noise and forgot to unmute myself. Sorry.
Yes, well, it's good that you muted yourself and not the powers that be that would be happy to mute you in the future.
But as I was saying, I think that as we seek at this late date to craft an electoral strategy, we need to be aware, for example, of the contraptions that we have to overcome, like the Electoral College, for example, which allows on the presidential level for the person to get fewer votes to prevail, as Al Gore and Hillary Rodham Clinton, and of course, Mr. Trump could well tell you. And so as I am sitting here in Dixie, where the right wing has had a stranglehold for decades now, it seems to me that in Dixie, and particularly in our neighbor next door in Louisiana, and their neighbor next door in Mississippi, where in Louisiana, approximately 30 odd years ago, you had a fascist and a Nazi, David Duke, win 55% of the Euro-American vote in a race for governor. And so I think that if we keep doing the same thing in Dixie without considering alternatives, we're probably going to end up with the same results. So I would say to our friends on the left that they may want to take a more nuanced view with regard to electoral strategy, depending upon the state, because a presidential race is 50 different races. It's not one unitary race. And in places where the fascist right has flexed their muscles and demonstrated their strength, I think it's legitimate to start talking about third-party alternatives. You may not necessarily want to do that in North Carolina, in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Arizona, and in Nevada. But I guess that other friends on the left feel that it's important for us all to be united, shoulder to shoulder on the same page, irrespective of recent history, irrespective of the fact that the right wing has a stranglehold. Now, if that is the point of view, then I think the rationale for that point of view needs to be articulated. I guess the rationale is that having that kind of monolithic unity in the face of this right-wing threat is extremely and exceedingly important. But I haven't heard that rationale put forward.
The rationale and clarify. I want to make sure we understand you.
The rationale that in Dixie, I mean, look, in Dixie, 9 out of 10 Euro-Americans vote for the right wing. I'm speaking of my neighbors in Louisiana in particular, where, as I said, a fascist won. And so, I mean, a fascist almost won the race for governor. So the question is, people in Louisiana who are progressive need to vote the same way as people in North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, because I guess, as I said, and I'll say again, that it's important to have this kind of monolithic unity, despite the fact that voting in a certain kind of way really hasn't produced results in terms of chipping away the strength of the David Dukes of this country.
Okay, and Greg Carr, what would you have to say? I think sometimes when I listen to, as again Gerald calls it, my friends on the left, it almost seems to me sometimes that, of course, unfortunately, we can imagine all too clearly the horrors of this genocide. But we also, I hate to say this, need to imagine how much worse it could be also in this country. And I hate to put that image forward, but to me and what some of our ancestors tell us is we need to organize as much as we can to make sure we have more negotiating room moving forward and that we're not all locked up with the keys thrown away. Dr. Carr?
Absolutely. And Joni, you've spent a great deal of your adult life working with those who are the most vulnerable. We're talking about public health. We're talking about living conditions, particularly, in this region, although, of course, back and forth between New York, but here in the District of Columbia, you've seen what it means to have government resources intervene, even if only in a small way. Unfortunately, and, we all have a lot of friends who are making this argument, some of them on these very airwaves, even as they pitch, as we are, for dollars to support this station, saying, oh, well, both parties are the same. Well, that's just not historically correct. That's not accurate. And you want, as our sister Linda Sarsour has said many times, including on these airwaves, our best opponents in positions of political power. That would be the Harris administration, should she be elected. I think that's what I would say in my capacity as an individual. Reverend William Barber, not speaking for repairs of the breach, not speaking for the Poor People's Campaign, but speaking as a private citizen, has endorsed the Harris presidency. This is a man who is very clear about being nonpartisan when it comes to working on behalf of particularly low-wage, low-wealth folk. and who gathered here in Washington, D.C. and was covered by WPFW, certainly the year before last. We were live on site with Katia and everyone else there. The point is that, it does have to be, and I echo what Dr. Horne has said, nuanced. We're looking now at political participation in Texas as of the weekend. About 5.3 million folks have early voted. We see that out of a population of over 18 million voting eligible folk in Texas. Florida, 4.5 million have voted. That's over a third. Also in Georgia, over a third, 2.8 million people have voted. And the mass news commercial entertainment media is saying that more Republicans have voted in person than Democrats, about 40% Republican, about 32% Democrat. But 27.8% of the people who have voted are not affiliated with either party. Now, how many of those votes are going to go to a third party candidate? As Gerald has said, if you're talking about a so-called battleground state, and quite frankly, people like Clay Kane on Sirius XM and others have said that, the largest block of voters in the United States of America are those who don't vote. There are enough registered voters in Texas to turn Texas away from the open fascist party in this election. I think Ted Cruz, the Mexico traveling when it gets tough senator out of Texas, is probably sweating a few bullets today because Colin Allred has been handing him his behind all over the map. And of course, anytime you have Beyonce and Willie Nelson sign up to support one campaign over the other, you can be sweating bullets. But I'm saying that remains, however, because of political non-participation, a bit of a fantasy in places like Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, which, if people voted their numbers, would look very different. We're in a moment when it can get worse. And to some of the folks on the left, and I'm thinking particularly about some of our friends, some of whom have been or are on this station, who we can have open arguments and debates with, who we might agree with ideologically, generally in theory. If there's one party that is elected this cycle, they're going to be okay, or at least they think they are. Some of them are college professors with pensions, with family members who are federal employees who might get turned out of their jobs by a Schedule 7 enacted in Agenda 47, which is the Trump administration's plan aligned with Project 2025. It might look in the short term that you'll be okay. You have disposable income in case somebody is pregnant in your family and Project 2025 is implemented, and they have to be put on a national registry because they want to track the people who are pregnant in this country, like some scene out of The Handmaid's Tale. But you have enough money to perhaps put them on a plane to Canada or Mexico or somewhere where they can take care of their health care needs should a decision be made in a way that ends up with terminating a pregnancy. So you might think it's okay. I think ultimately it is the height of ego. It is the height of self-centeredness. It is a thorough contempt for the least of these. The least of these that you have worked with, Joni, are fellow human beings. As Gerald has worked many years as a lawyer and consulting with the labor movement, everything from that to organizing against apartheid in South Africa. It is contempt for the least of these who will have the least protections in an administration that is looking to expel them, not only from the political project, the settler enterprise that none of us agree with completely, called United States of America, but from, in fact, our common humanity. It's contempt for those people to say that both these parties are the same.
Absolutely. It's time for another pitch break with Katia. And I don't know if we've gotten any pledges yet, but we need you guys, 1-800-222-9739. Or...
Yep, sorry. No, keep going.
Did we get any pledges,
We
Katia?
did. I just got so excited. Yes, we did. We want to say thank you to Gary Nelson. Gary, thank you. He is a faithful one out of Baltimore. He says he is proud of his association with WPFW, and we are so proud that you are one of our member supporters. We also want to say thank you to Lenore Winters of Owings, Maryland, who is also one of our returning recurring supporters, even in a pledge drive, and Anonymous out of DC. So we are still in need of $635 to go, folks. We have 19 minutes to do it. There are no better arguments than the ones that Dr. Carr and Dr. Horne put forth as to why WPFW is important, why To Heal DC is critical to the discourse of all things, but today, especially in terms of the election and what is happening. And of course, we, meaning Joni and I, can't tell you how to vote, but Joni does a fine job through the vehicle of these two gentlemen at lifting up all that is at stake. This is an American reckoning moment, and it's wonderful to have airwaves, even as Dr. Carr said, and Dr. Horne might have echoed it. We have very varied opinions about what should happen on November 5th on our air. But the beauty is that we have a space where all of those perspectives can be heard, can be honored, can be respected. And, we have this public discourse. We don't always, the left is not a monolith. I don't even like the term the left. I'm not sure what that is anymore, but we are not, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what that is, but what we do know is that we're not a monolith. But and also theoretically, we should always be for the people, for the upliftment of those that are the least of these, those that are most marginalized, most oppressed, wherever they are in the world. And I'm proud of the fact, and we are proud of the fact that To Heal DC does that every week. Make sure that the issues facing our brothers and sisters, our family across this nation and around the globe who are suffering the most. And not only lifting them up, but also often showing us the examples of how they are fixing the problems facing them. They are dealing with the issues. They don't need outside help. They don't need us. Whomever they are or we are, most communities can find the solution. And Joni is so great at connecting the audience with those who are finding the solutions for their people, for their neighbors, for their family, for their society. And if you believe in that, please go to the phones right now. We want to say, we just got another one, Joni. Phil Portlock, thank you so much, out of Silver Spring, Maryland. Now we have $435 to go, folks. We are almost there. A little over half to go. $435, 10:43 this morning. And so 17 more minutes to do it. I have no doubt that the discourse that's going to continue here will be the reason that you give your support to Heal DC. 800-222-9739, WPFWFM.org.
Thank you, Katia, and thank you, Phil Partlock. He is a filmmaker, made a magnificent film about the history of voting rights and the struggles for voting rights in this country. But again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of this moment that we're in. Things are one way now. Things can be completely different 2 weeks from today. And I'm struck, Dr. Horne and Dr. Carr, sometimes, although I'm usually right there with our young folks, Harriet's Wildest Dreams and others, but as much as the young folks do understand the horrors that are taking place in this country with police brutality and et cetera, I'm not sure that everyone really understands what fascism in this country, full fascism, would mean. And I can remember my mother talking about the thousands, I think it was thousands of homeless people out in the streets in New York City with no place to live. The people, many, many more people back in those days did not have food to eat. As bad as it is now, it could be worse. The people that when I was growing up during the McCarthy period, the people who could not get jobs in the public schools, on and on. So yes, we are against genocide, but we also need to know that fascism is even, I hate to say even worse. They're both horrible, but what gives us a better place, manipulating place to move forward, to negotiate change? So again, we only have a few minutes left. Dr. Carr and Dr. Horne, let's see perhaps what your concluding words are today about this election taking place now and coming to perhaps an end 8 days from now. Dr. Horne?
Well, I agree with you that any who suggest that things can't get worse are engaged in massive self-deception. With regard to defining fascism, there are many definitions, but to put it in a pithy manner, it's the terroristic dictatorship of the most backward and retrograde sectors of the U.S. ruling elite. Or to put it another way, it would be a good deal of the progressive community, and certainly the Black community, being treated in a way that was worse than Black people were treated during the height of Jim Crow. That is to say, execution without due process of law, For example, we have that with regard to today concerning police terror. But of course, during the bad old days of Jim Crow, it oftentimes took place at the hands of mobs. But once again, I think it's important to try to have a long term perspective. Speaking of the least of these, in Kazan, Russia, just this past week, you had Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a number of other nations plotting, despite their protestations to the contrary, to weaken the paramountcy of the US dollar. If that happens sometime over the horizon, that could really challenge the living standards of those who exist on fixed incomes, such as Social Security, such as stagnant wages. It would basically mean a sharp curtailment in their standard of living and working conditions. But if the organizations that are sworn to uphold our living standards, such as unions and the NAACP, for example, are either unaware of what's going on, or alternatively, and I can speak personally to this, seek to marginalize and circumscribe those of us who are trying to focus on these issues, well, we're obviously headed for a dead end. And I think we need to uphold and uplift that particular idea as well.
Absolutely. And Greg Carr, what do you have to say as people will be voting this week and voting on Tuesday, a week from tomorrow? Yes, many of us do not, and I heard Harriet's Wildest Dreams come out yesterday. They say, we're not voting for genocide. Yes, we don't want to vote for genocide, but there is somewhat of a choice that people need to understand. What puts us in a better position to negotiate as we move forward in our lives? Dr. Carr.
Joni, I want to thank you, thank WPFW, thank Katia, thank Mike, thank our brilliant brother, Gerald Horne, for this dialogue, lifting up Harriet's Wildest Dreams, lifting up every host and every listener in our beautiful community, our beloved community here. And everyone we don't always agree with on everything, I want to lift everybody up in that. And in the spirit of generosity, refrain from doing what is in my soul, which is to basically say the equivalent of pouring a bucket of cold water over their heads for folks to wake up. Or these people who think somehow that withholding a vote for one campaign will do nothing other than help the campaign that has some very, very real and deliberate plans and have dropped all facades on the way to a confrontation that the people who are saying that we're in a duopoly and all parties are the same are simply not prepared to fight. Let's say you get your wildest dream. Let's say you get the heightening of contradictions that lead to a confrontation. Do you really have that kind of weaponry? Do you really have that kind of infrastructure and apparatus to wage that kind of battle? And more importantly, in the spirit of everybody from Ella Baker and Septa McClure to Martin King to that very Harriet Tubman, a faithful member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, is that your temperament? Because it will be the species and the planet that will suffer because of that. And guess what? Elon Musk jumping wildly and gesticulating behind Donald Trump in Western Pennsylvania a few weeks ago with an Occupy Mars t-shirt on gives about as much a damn about you as he does the species that he is killing on the Gulf Coast of Texas, even as we speak, with the Environmental Protection Agency in the scope of Project 2025 as he plots his departure to Mars. And so I would say this, what we do tangibly? Well, for the next 2 weeks, we can vote. We can stand in the way to intervene, vote for harm prevention, vote for harm reduction, vote for some form of self-determination and defense, vote so that you can put an administration in. And I would say this, Kamala Harris is no saint, and John Henry Clark, you say in some stories there aren't any good guys. Her brother-in-law, Tony West, the chief lawyer for Uber, as they tried to make sure that organized labor could not work and drive in those cars and getting some protections, she is more of a capitalist than Joe Biden in terms of her plans. She wants to lower the corporate tax rate from where the Biden administration had it. So we're not talking about We're not talking about purity. We're not talking about black and white. Although perhaps some of our folk who are talking, and I'm including some black nationalists who consider themselves black nationalists, but then perhaps don't really understand the intellectual trajectory and tradition of black nationalism, who would say that, they're both parties are the same. Listen, finally, this is the rhetorical bucket of cold water. Wake up. And yeah, I said the least of these. And yes, we've heard that many times. Michael Gomez in his book, Exchanging Our Country, Mark, says that it isn't those of us who are in this conversation right now who represent Africa to America. It is what Mike Gomez called the least of these, the folk who are the most vulnerable, the people who they excoriated at Madison Square Garden yesterday, the people who they refer to as vermin in the echoing the language of Adolf Hitler, a brunette with brown eyes who told a nation that you had to be blind and blue-eyed in order to be part of the humanity. And by the way, whether it be Byron Donalds or Clarence Thomas or Ben Carson, who has a chapter in Project 2025, it doesn't matter how you look physically if your mentality has been overwhelmed by this fascist. Listen, wake up. Wake up. That bucket of cold water just came over your head. Wake up. If not for you, for everybody else.
Absolutely. And I want to urge people, make a pledge in honor of your ancestors and in honor of our ancestors here on WPFW. Dory Ladner just left us, supposedly left us. She's still right here with us, but she left us physically in June. Actually, I'm trying to remember the date. Her birthday was June, but make a pledge in honor of Dory Ladner, and make a pledge in honor of Damu Smith. Many of you do remember Damu, who left us quite a while ago. He started Black Voices for Peace back in the day. Mm-hmm. Make a pledge in honor of Bill Lucy, who just left us, who was marching there with the sanitation workers back in 1968 with Dr. King, was on these airwaves consistently on this show for many years. He just left us a few weeks ago. Make a pledge in honor of Ambrose Elaine Sr., who used to be on for many decades on this hour.
Joni, can I just break in for a minute?
Yes.
Because we have some folks to thank, and I want to make sure time doesn't run down. We're not able to do that. We want to, and to your point of making pledges in honor of ancestors, Anonymous out of Silver Spring says, pledging again in honor of A.C. Byrd, Damu Smith, Kenneth Jones, and they want to remain anonymous. And
wow.
we honored that, Anonymous. Thank you so much for your generous pledge. Also, John Parkman Jr. out of D.C., thank you so much for your pledge. $235 to go, folks. $235 to meet the goal. Very quickly, the number is 202-588-9739 or 800-222-9739, or you can go online to WPFWFM.org. Again, 202-588-9739. Only $235 to go, folks. We can do this together. Become a sustaining member at the $10, $20, $50, $100 level, and Joni will get the entire credit this morning. $235 to go, or you can go online to WPFWFM.org. And there's another one, $220 now. Thank you so much. Anonymous, on-air donation to Heal DC from a listener in Silver Spring, an Arab American voting for Harris. Okay, now, thank you so much for raising your voice. And again, that is the beauty of WPFW, right? All perspectives here should be honored, and we appreciate you so much for your pledge of support. We're down to $220. We can do this. 800-222-9739, WPFWFM.org.
And that would be just two people pledging $12 a month, and we would make it. Of course, you can pledge after this show, but we want you to pledge during this show so we know that we made our goal. We know that WPFW can remain strong as we're getting ready to move. Make that pledge. Greg, did you want to say something?
I just want to thank you and encourage folks to pledge, and know that you can go online. You can do it by phone. Today is moving day at WPFW. We need every penny. We want that socialist world. We want that, but right now we need the money that folds, and we need the money that sends on e-transfer.
Yes, so, and Gerald, you have 30 seconds or a minute.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to Dr. Carr for joining in to this robust conversation. And I would also like to echo the pledge in honor of A.C. Byrd, the late A.C. Byrd, an old friend of mine who's joined the ancestors, but is the kind of name and individual we need to uplift. That is to say, a peace activist, an anti-racist activist, a DC activist.
Absolutely, and WPFW activist, and his spirit was there at the Paul Robeson's Awards Saturday. It's time for us to go, Mikey says, and this is Melvin Peebles from 1971. Listen to what he says.
Know that those of us who are revolutionary and Africanists is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.
No, this ain't America.